Snow came down the way regret does, slow at first, then all at once. The wind hissed across the white plain as Alara Vance pressed forward, boots sinking deep into the drifted path that wound toward the faint outline of a town. Her shawl, once red, hung heavy and dark with meltwater. Each gust tore through her like memory, bringing with it the faint sting of laughter, the kind women use when they want a wound without leaving a mark. She had left that laughter behind in another saloon, another town, another night where her beauty was both shield and curse. Now, the world was only snow and silence. By the time she reached the first lamp of the settlement, her lips were cracked, her fingers raw from clutching the threadbare fabric at her throat. The streets were empty, but not blind. Curtains twitched. Someone's dog barked once and went quiet. She heard a door creak open and close again. She wasn't a stranger to this kind of welcome. The general store's door yielded to her push, the bell above it giving a half-hearted chime. Inside, heat from a small stove breathed life into her numb hands. The woman behind the counter, round-faced, gray-haired, with sharp eyes, watched her like someone measuring an unpaid debt. "Evenin'," Alara murmured, her voice hoarse. The woman set down her ledger. "Evenin'. We're near closing." "I just need bread," she said, placing a damp coin on the counter. The woman studied her a long moment, then turned to the shelves. The store smelled of dust, tallow, and molasses. "You're not from around here," the woman said flatly. "No," Alara replied. "And I don't aim to stay long." "That's good. Folks here don't forget easy." She placed the loaf down and folded her arms. "You're the one they were talking about down the road. Sang at McCall's saloon in Lanton before the fire." Alara's spine stiffened. "That was years ago." The woman's tone softened just enough to sting. "Years don't melt in these parts. Not even under snow." Alara slid the bread toward herself, her hand trembling. "You could just call me what you mean to." The woman sighed, lowering her voice. "Girl, I ain't your enemy. But you should know, there's only one soul here fool enough to offer shelter to a woman the town won't touch. And he don't take kindly to strangers either." Alara's lips parted. "Who?" The woman nodded toward the frosted window, where the snow blew like white smoke. "Old Apache lives up on the ridge. They call him Grey Wolf. Half say he's a ghost, half say he's a curse. But he's got a roof, and he don't ask questions." Alara looked down at the bread in her hands. A roof sounded like sin and salvation both. When she stepped outside, the night had thickened, the sky bruised with storm. She pulled her shawl tight, but the cold bit through. She'd taken only a few steps before she felt it, that uncanny stillness before the wind turns. Then, from the haze, a figure emerged. Tall, broad, wrapped in a heavy coat the color of smoke. His long white hair was tied back with a strip of leather, his face carved by time rather than beaten by it. He stood beside a dark horse that pawed the snow and snorted softly. Alara froze. He didn't speak, didn't even look directly at her. Only studied her with eyes as calm as a winter river. "I don't need help," she said. The man gave a single nod, as though she'd said something true. He turned and began walking toward the ridge, boots crunching in the snow. After several paces he stopped, looked back, and gestured toward the horse. "I said I don't." But her voice vanished into the storm. He waited. Something in the quiet steadiness of his stance, neither pleading nor commanding, broke the wall of pride she'd carried for years. She stepped forward, teeth chattering, and mounted awkwardly. He took the lead rope, walking ahead as the horse carried her through the rising snow. The world narrowed to the sound of hooves and the slow rhythm of his breath. The climb was steep, the air thin. She saw the faint glow of a lantern at last, a cabin tucked beneath a slope of pines, smoke rising in lazy curls. When they reached the porch, she slid down clumsily, nearly falling. His hand caught her arm, strong and calloused but careful. "I can stand," she muttered. He released her instantly. "Then stand," he said. His voice was deep, worn smooth by silence, and laced with an accent that lingered like the ghost of fire smoke. Inside, the cabin was simple. Stone hearth, wooden table, furs over chairs, and the smell of cedar. A pot simmered on the stove, its steam curling upward like prayer. She hovered near the door. "You don't know who I am." He hung his coat, his movements deliberate. "You're cold. Hungry." "That's not what I meant." He nodded. "It's all that matters tonight." The gentleness unsettled her. She'd been pitied before, by men who wanted something in return. But this wasn't pity. It was the kind of mercy that left her unarmed. He ladled stew into a wooden bowl and placed it on the table. "Eat. I'll tend the horse." Before she could reply, he stepped back into the snow. Alara sank onto the bench, hands trembling around the warmth. The taste of the stew, simple, wild herbs and meat, brought tears she hadn't expected. Outside, the wind beat against the cabin like a living thing. Inside, the fire whispered in low tongues, and for the first time in years, she didn't hear laughter. When he returned, his coat glistened with melting snow. He set another log on the fire and glanced at her empty bowl. "You came from the south," he said softly. "Farther than that." He nodded once, eyes on the flames. "Snow hides many tracks." She looked at him then, really looked. The lines around his mouth, the strength in his shoulders, the quiet in his gaze. His white hair caught the firelight like silver thread. There was age in him, yes, but no weakness. He carried solitude the way other men carried rifles. "What do they call you?" she asked. "Tayan." "Grey Wolf?" He gave the ghost of a smile. "They call what they fear." Something fragile stirred in her chest. Recognition, maybe, or envy of that calm defiance. She said, "If you're letting me stay, it won't be for long." "I'm not. Someone worth keeping." Tayan stirred the fire with an iron poker, sparks jumping like startled birds. Fire doesn't choose what wood burns warmest. She wanted to argue, but her throat closed around the words. The wind shrieked suddenly outside, rattling the shutters. Tayan stood, moved to the door and tested the latch. "Storm will last till dawn," he said. "You'll sleep inside. I'll take the chair." "I don't need." He looked at her then, steady, unreadable. "You need rest." The certainty in his tone disarmed her again. She found herself lying beneath a quilt that smelled faintly of pine, listening to the storm pound against the roof. Through half-lidded eyes, she watched him sit by the hearth, the fire painting his skin in bronze and gold. Sleep hovered but didn't claim her. Her mind drifted through memories of towns and faces that turned away, of the first man who'd called her beautiful, and the last who'd called her cursed. She didn't know which hurt worse. When the wind eased, she rose quietly, drawn to the window. Below, the valley shimmered under moonlight, the snow unbroken except for their tracks leading up the hill. She saw them vanish into white, and thought of how easily the world forgets where we've been. Behind her, his voice came low, near a whisper. "You left sorrow behind you tonight. Don't take it back come morning." She turned. He hadn't moved from the chair, but his eyes were open, watching her, reflecting the firelight. "Do you tell that to everyone you save?" she asked. "I save no one," he said. "Just share the roof." Alara wanted to believe him, but something in his tone said otherwise, something that sounded like waiting. The storm deepened outside, but inside the air was still, dense with the unspoken. She lay back down, heart unsteady. His silhouette blurred in the dim glow, and before sleep took her, she thought she heard him whisper, not to her but to the night itself, "Maybe this time, the snow brings someone who stays." The wind howled once more, carrying his words into darkness, and the world fell silent again. Dawn rose pale and slow, the kind that never quite warmed the bones. Alara woke to the creak of wood and the scent of cedar smoke. Tayan was outside already, his shadow long in the blue morning light, splitting logs with a rhythm that sounded like patience itself. Each strike echoed through the ridge, measured, certain, unhurried. She lay still a moment, listening, wondering how a man so old could move like that, how a world so cold could hold such quiet steadiness. When she stepped outside, snow still dusted the ground, but the air had softened. He glanced at her once, nodded toward the pile of wood, and said nothing. His eyes were dark, unreadable, as if seeing through layers of time. She pulled her shawl tighter. "You don't talk much," she said. He rested the axe against the stump. Words don't heat the fire. That might have been humor, or warning. She couldn't tell. They fell into a rhythm that first day. She swept the cabin, mended a torn curtain, stirred the pot left from last night's stew. He hauled water from the stream, fed the horse, worked with the kind of grace that belonged to men who had nothing left to prove. Every gesture seemed carved from habit, from solitude long made peace with. By evening, silence had become a kind of language. When she set a bowl of food before him, he nodded once in thanks, no words wasted. His hands, scarred, sinewed, darkened by sun and smoke, lifted the spoon with reverence, as if the act of eating was a prayer. She watched him from across the table, the firelight dancing across the silver in his hair. There was strength there still, but not the kind that sought to be seen. Something in that quiet steadiness unnerved her. She was used to men who filled silence with noise, who mistook cruelty for control. Tayan's stillness forced her to hear her own thoughts, and she wasn't sure she liked their sound. The next morning, she found him repairing a broken fence by the horse pen. "I can help," she said, brushing hair from her face. He looked at her hands, delicate and half-healed from old burns. "You don't have to." "I know." She picked up a hammer anyway. The wood was cold beneath her palms, the nails stiff with frost. They worked side by side in silence, the rhythm of their labor sinking to the wind's slow breath. By midday, sweat beaded her brow. When she paused to wipe it, she caught him watching. Not in the way men usually watched, but as though he were studying something fragile, afraid it might break if he looked too long. She turned away, embarrassed by the heat rising in her cheeks. Later, inside, she found a small carved comb resting on the table. The wood was smooth, shaped from birch, a feather etched along its spine. She ran her thumb across it, feeling the fine grooves. "I made it," he said from the doorway. "For me?" He shrugged slightly. "You needed one." That night, she couldn't sleep. The fire crackled low, and outside the wind carried whispers of distant coyotes. She turned the comb in her hand, and wondered what a man like him had lost to become this quiet. The days folded into one another, marked by the steady rhythm of work and the long hush of evenings. He spoke little, but his presence filled the room in ways words never could. She began to notice the small things. The way he paused to listen before opening a door, the soft click of his tongue when the horse approached, the faint smile that came when snowflakes melted on his coat. Her shame began to soften, though she did not yet know it. The edges of her self-hatred dulled under his silence. There were moments when she almost forgot why she had run so far north. Almost. On the 7th morning, she went to town alone. The path wound through tall pines, their needles heavy with snow. The villagers' eyes followed her like knives. Inside the store, Amelia May gave her a tight smile. "So he took you in," she said, tone half pity, half warning. "I suppose even the lonely have their mercy." Alara's throat burned. She paid for coffee and sugar, turned to leave, but Amelia's voice followed her out the door. "You be careful. That ridge has buried more than snow." When she returned, the sky was bruising toward dusk. Tayan sat by the fire, sharpening a knife. She set the parcels on the table and said lightly, "They think you're a ghost." He smiled faintly. "Better a ghost than a man they can harm." She studied him. The wrinkles at the corners of his eyes, the deep scar that traced along his jaw. "What did you do to make them fear you?" He met her gaze evenly. "Survived." She wanted to ask more, but his expression closed like a door. The fire crackled between them, the only sound in the small cabin. Later that night, she woke to the sound of movement. Through the window, she saw him outside, kneeling in the snow before a small wooden cross half buried under frost. A single candle burned beside it, its flame bending to the wind. Alara pulled on her shawl and stepped out, the cold biting her feet through thin shoes. She stopped a few paces behind him, not wanting to intrude. "She was my wife," he said softly without turning. "Enola." The name carried through the cold air like prayer. "I didn't mean to." "You didn't," he said. "But the snow doesn't forget. It covers. Never erases." Alara's heart tightened. "I understand that." He rose slowly, joints stiff, and faced her. The candlelight caught his eyes, turning them to dark amber. "Then you know why I live up here. Quiet doesn't judge." For a moment, they stood in the stillness, breath mingling in the cold air. She wanted to tell him about the things she'd done. The nights she'd traded her dignity for a roof, the faces she couldn't remember, the voices that called her unworthy. But the words froze behind her teeth. Tayan reached into his coat and handed her the candle. "For what you've lost," he said. Her hand shook as she took it. The small flame flickered, fragile but alive. She bent down and pressed it into the snow beside the cross, watching the light waver. When she looked up, he was watching her again. Quiet, solemn, as if measuring something unseen. Back inside, neither spoke. She lay awake long after he'd fallen asleep in the chair, his breathing steady, his face softened by firelight. For the first time, she wondered if maybe the snow hadn't buried her after all, only hidden her until someone patient enough came to dig her out. Outside, wind swept across the ridge, scattering flakes like feathers. She closed her eyes, holding the image of that lone candle burning against the storm. Somewhere deep within her, something began to thaw. Winter settled deeper, and the ridge became a world apart. The cabin's smoke curled steady each morning, a single thread of warmth against an ocean of white. Alara rose before dawn now, lighting the stove, her movements quiet and sure. The days had taken shape around small rituals: firewood, mending, tending the horse, watching the light shift across the snow. Tayan spoke little, but his presence filled the silence with calm purpose. In the rhythm of his life, she'd found something she hadn't known she was missing: permission to simply exist. Yet peace in one place has a way of stirring unrest in another. When she went to town again, the whispers began. It started as murmurs at the edge of her hearing, like wind slipping under a door. By the time she reached the store, the voices had names and teeth. "She's living with him," someone hissed. "With that old Apache? She's doing what she's always done. Lord, he must be blind or desperate." Alara kept her chin high as she stepped inside. Amelia May paused mid-sentence with a group of women, and gave her a brittle smile. "Afternoon, Miss Vance. Weather's cruel, ain't it?" "It is," Alara said, her voice even. "Cold makes folk talk more than they should." The women exchanged looks. One of them, younger and bold-eyed, said, "Heard you're up on the ridge now. Ain't safe up there, you know. Old man like that, don't know what he's capable of." Alara met her gaze. "I do." For a moment, the woman faltered. Alara paid for flour and kerosene, ignoring the sting of their stares as she walked out. But words cling like smoke. They followed her home. By the time she reached the ridge, the sky was bruised with evening. Tayan stood by the fence, repairing a broken rail. "Long trip," he said without turning. "Town's full of voices," she murmured. "They're talking about us." He set down the hammer. "Let them. It doesn't bother you?" "The wind talks too. I don't listen to that either." She wanted to admire that calm, but the old ache inside her resisted. Shame had lived too long in her bones to quiet easily. She dropped the sack of flour too hard, spilling a cloud of white onto the snow. "Easy for you," she snapped. "You've nothing left to lose." Tayan's head turned slightly, his eyes sharp beneath his white hair. "You think I built this quiet because I had nothing left? No. I built it because I lost enough." The words struck her harder than the cold. She knelt, gathering the spilled flour with trembling hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He didn't answer. But when she rose, the fence was fixed, and the hammer lay waiting for her to hand it back. Their fingers brushed. Neither pulled away. That night, the air was brittle with frost. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the walls. Alara sat by the window, combing her hair with the wooden comb he'd carved. She caught her reflection in the glass, pale, older, tired, and thought how fragile peace felt when the world refused to let it stand. Tayan spoke from the hearth. "When I was young, we called gossip the slow fire. Burns nothing fast, but it leaves no part untouched." She looked up. "Then what do we do?" He fed another log into the flames. "We endure." She smiled sadly. You make it sound easy. It isn't, he said. But it's the only thing worth learning. The days that followed were harder. Townsfolk stopped waving when she rode in. The sheriff, Boone, offered her a warning wrapped in kindness. People remember what they want to, Miss Vance. You might think they're done talkin', but talk's a seed. It grows wild if you let it. Alara folded her arms. You think I should leave? He hesitated. I think peace is worth protectin', however you can find it. But that man's been alone near 20 years. The town fears what it don't understand. I'm tired of running, she said softly. Boone's gaze softened. Then stay. Just know the wind'll turn before it rests. He was right. The change came one night when the wind carried smoke that wasn't from their chimney. Tayan woke first. The sky flickered orange beyond the ridge. By the time they reached the barn, it was half in flames. The horses screamed, trapped. Alara ran for a bucket. Tayan grabbed a shovel, breaking open the side wall to free the mare. Heat scorched their faces, smoke clawing at their throats. Together they fought the blaze, snow melting under their boots. When it was over, the barn was nothing but a skeleton of ash and steam. A wooden plank at the edge of the ruin bore a single word scrawled in tar. Whore. Alara stood frozen, chest heaving. Tayan read it in silence, the firelight flickering in his eyes. His expression didn't harden or break, it simply stilled, like water gone to ice. This is my fault, she said hoarsely. They did this because of me. He turned to her, voice low but certain. They did it because they still fear what they don't understand. Her throat burned. You should have never taken me in. He stepped closer. You should never believe their words are worth more than your own. Tears streaked down her soot-stained face. You don't know what it's like, being the thing everyone despises. I do, he said quietly. More than you think. For the first time, anger cracked through his calm, a quiet, righteous flame that burned without raising his voice. They took my land, my wife, my son, and when they were done, they left me silence. I could have filled it with hate. Instead, I built walls strong enough to keep it out. Don't you tear them down with shame that isn't yours. His words silenced the wind. She pressed a hand to her chest, the weight of his truth too heavy to bear. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled. Then what do we do now? He looked toward the ruins, embers glowing faintly. We build again. And they did. The next morning, before the sun had cleared the ridge, they began gathering what the fire hadn't taken. The work was slow, but it bound them. Each board lifted was a defiance. Each nail struck was a prayer. When her hands blistered, he wrapped them in cloth, his fingers careful, reverent. When he coughed from the cold, she brought him water laced with honey. They spoke little, but the silence between them had changed. It was no longer absence, it was understanding. By the time the barn stood again, rough but whole, spring had begun to whisper beneath the snow. The first thaw ran down the hill in thin silver streams. The world, it seemed, was trying to forgive itself. One evening, as dusk bled into violet, Alara stood by the fence and watched Tayan lead the horse inside. He moved slower now, the long winter showing in his gait. When he saw her watching, he smiled faintly. Looks almost right again. It does. She hesitated, then said, They'll talk more when they see it standing. Then let them talk, he said, resting a hand on the rail. The ridge doesn't answer back. She studied his profile. The white hair, the strong line of his jaw, the scar that crossed it like a river. Something inside her softened and ached at once. Why did you help me that night? She asked quietly. He turned to her. Because the snow brought you. Her breath caught. You make it sound like fate. Fate, he said, is just the name we give to mercy we didn't expect. The wind carried their words across the valley, where the town lights flickered like distant judgment. She felt it then, the first true stirrings of love, raw and frightening in its purity. Inside, the fire waited. They sat close that night, not touching, just sharing the glow. His hand brushed hers once, neither pulling away. Outside, the world was still. But from the dark beyond the trees came the faint creak of footsteps on snow, too deliberate to be the wind. Tayan lifted his head, listening. Alara froze. Somewhere below the ridge, someone was watching the house. The snow returned like an old promise, soft at first, then relentless. The ridge vanished beneath white silence, and the world seemed to fold inward. Tayan had grown weaker over the last weeks. He moved slower, coughed more, yet his pride never allowed complaint. Alara noticed everything. The tremor in his hands when he lifted the kettle, the pause before rising from his chair. When she asked if he was unwell, he only smiled. Winter's heavy this year. That's all. But the truth lay written in his breath, shallow and thin. The storm outside wasn't the only one rising. That evening, the wind came screaming down from the north, hurling snow against the windows. The flames inside danced wild in their glass, painting the cabin in gold and shadow. Tayan stood by the door, looking into the blizzard as if waiting for something unseen. Alara went to him. "It's too cold to be out there." He didn't move. "Storms, remember," he said quietly. "They bring back what we thought buried." She didn't understand, but his tone chilled her more than the wind. He turned away, coughing hard, bracing against the table until it passed. When she touched his arm, his skin felt hot beneath her fingers. "Fever." "Tayan," she whispered, fear threading her voice. "You need to lie down." He shook his head, stubborn as stone. "I'll sit by the fire. It listens better than I do." She fetched blankets, water, a bowl of broth that went untouched. He sat upright, eyes fixed on the flames as if they were telling a story only he could hear. When he spoke again, his voice had softened into memory. "My wife used to sing when the wind rose like this. Said the spirits walk inside the snow. Said we shouldn't fear them, only the ones inside ourselves." Alara knelt beside him, her hand resting on his sleeve. "You loved her deeply." He nodded, eyes distant. Enough to let her go. Enough to wait for peace after. He turned to her, gaze sharp but gentle. "You think love ends when the body leaves? No. It waits. Changes shape. Learns to breathe through others." The words struck her like warmth and ache at once. "You're talking about her," she said, voice trembling. "About you," he corrected. The storm howled louder, shaking the walls. She felt something rise in her throat. Fear, affection, something larger than either. She wanted to speak, to tell him that his quiet had rebuilt the parts of her no one else had bothered to touch. But before she could, he doubled over, coughing hard, crimson blooming against his hand. "Tayan." He tried to wave her off, but his strength gave way. She caught him as he sagged, lowering him to the floor by the hearth. His skin burned with fever, his breath came ragged. She pressed a wet cloth to his brow, whispering prayers she barely remembered. "Don't you dare leave me now," she said fiercely. "Not after all this time." His eyes fluttered open. "The ridge needs tending," he murmured. "And so do you." She bit back tears. "Then stay. Please." He smiled faintly. "Even mountains bow to storms." Outside, the wind screamed. The cabin groaned, snow piling high against the walls. Alara moved from stove to chair, feeding the fire, tending him through the night. Hours blurred into the steady rhythm of breath and flame. Somewhere near dawn, he grew still, eyes half open, staring at the ceiling beams. "I see her," he whispered. Alara froze. "Who?" "Enola," he said softly. "She's smiling. Says the storms only come to wash the world clean." Tears spilled down Alara's cheeks. "Then tell her to wait. Tell her you're not done here." He blinked slowly, the ghost of a laugh leaving his lips. "Stubborn woman. Learned it from you." A long silence followed, broken only by the hiss of wind and the crackle of burning wood. Then, faintly, he reached for her hand. "If you stay," he said, "the ridge will stay alive." "I will." "Then I've waited long enough." Panic surged through her. She pressed her forehead to his hand. "Don't say that. You're not going anywhere." But his eyes had softened, his breath slowing like the tide. The firelight flickered across his face, turning each wrinkle into a line of history. And then, stillness. For a long moment, she couldn't move. The world outside roared, the roof groaning under weight, yet inside, time seemed to stop. She felt the quiet settle like snow inside her chest. Then came a knock. 3 firm raps against the door. Alara rose, heart pounding. She opened it to find Sheriff Boone and Amelia May standing there, faces red from the cold. Behind them, the faint glow of torches cut through the storm. Boone's eyes took in the scene, the fire, the still figure, the woman trembling beside him, and softened. "We came when we saw the smoke," he said. "Thought you might need help." Her voice was a whisper. "He's gone." Amelia May stepped forward, her hand trembling as she laid it on Alara's arm. "I'm sorry, dear." Something in the woman's tone, gentle, unguarded, broke the last of Alara's restraint. She nodded once, unable to speak. Boone removed his hat, bowing his head. For the first time, silence held no malice. It felt like respect. They helped her through the morning, laying him beneath the pines behind the cabin. The storm began to break, sunlight seeping weakly through the clouds. Snowflakes drifted slow as ash over the freshly turned ground. When they left, she stayed kneeling beside the grave, the comb he'd carved resting in her palm. She traced its feathered spine and set it gently atop the mound. "You waited," she whispered. "And I came too late." But then, as the wind shifted, she heard it, the faintest echo carried through the trees. A voice low and steady. "You came right on time." The air stilled. She rose slowly, brushing snow from her skirts, and looked out over the valley. The town below gleamed faintly in the thawing light. For the first time, it didn't feel like exile. It felt like something she could face. That evening, she lit a single candle on the table, and sat in his chair by the hearth. Outside, the ridge shone silver beneath the moon. The fire crackled, familiar and alive. She spoke softly into the quiet. "You said storms remember. Maybe that's how love survives, by circling back." Her voice trembled, but the words held. "I'll keep this place. I'll keep you." A soft gust slipped through the doorframe, stirring the candle flame. For an instant it swayed, then steadied, burning straight and tall. She smiled through tears. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered, not in the air, but in her, the warmth, the patience, the strength he'd left behind. Outside, dawn began its climb, painting the snow in gold. Somewhere deep beneath it, spring was already stirring.